We're fighting back at the horror movie syllabus. What are we fighting back against? I don't know, but we're going to have a good time doing it. Let's check out this week's videos. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you an idea about what the Horror Movie Syllabus is trying to do. But in short, what we are doing is taking a particular subgenre of horror and then looking at 3 movies from that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're looking at is fighting back. And for those of you that have been watching the Horror Movie Syllabus regularly, you know that we recently talked about revenge horror movies. That was a pretty good video, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But in that video, we talked about the revenge subgenre and the fighting back subgenre are very, very close. Like that Venn diagram has a lot of overlap in it. So what's the distinction between it? Well, what we said in that video and what we're going to reiterate here is that revenge horror movies tend to be where a victim of some sort of past wrong goes back and gets revenge for that past wrong. Whereas fighting back is when somebody is being attacked or wronged and is fighting back in that moment, which admittedly is something of a nuanced distinction between the two. And as I admitted in the last video, it's because I like these kinds of movies. And this gave me an opportunity to talk about more of them. And as we go through the movies, the fighting back movies this week, you'll see that, yeah, some of these could really probably be classified as revenge movies, just like some of the revenge movies probably would be better classified as fighting back movies. What am I going to do, man? I like the subgenres. I like these kinds of movies. I want to talk about them. And frankly, it seems like a lot of you like them too. So I think we're all on the same page that why not talk about more of these? And we can debate which subgenre they go into and you know, whether or not we're missing some, like we always do in the comments. It's fun. And that's kind of the key thing about these kind of movies is fun. Unlike the revenge movies that we looked at last week, which are oftentimes kind of bleak and heavy and dealing with some really sensitive stuff, a lot of, not all of, but a lot of the fighting back movies kind of aim more for just a good time, a fun ride, you know, maybe a gory ride, maybe, you know, pretty tense, but generally speaking, they're trying to have a good time. And you're going to see that as a kind of a recurring motif in the movies we talk about this week. And that's a big appeal to me for this particular subgenre. The fun involved in watching somebody, you know, fight back, frankly. We talked about this a little bit in the revenge subgenre. You know, those movies can be a little hard to watch, but at the end, they tend to be satisfying because you see this victim turn the tables and get the comeuppance on the attackers or on the criminals, and fighting back is, you know, the same general concept. It's, you know, somebody who's being wronged, being attacked, and then turning the tables and fighting back and kind of giving that comeuppance again. It's a very satisfying feeling, and it makes for a rewarding viewing experience. Fighting back, unlike the revenge movies, though, generally doesn't have that rough ride. You know, that rough early part where the, you know, the victim is being, you know, beaten or whatever horrible thing is happening, with some exceptions, you know, or maybe I'm just kind of comparing and contrasting against the really heavy movies we looked at in the revenge video. But I think you'll agree that this week's movies, by and large, fun movies. Now, as we always do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus, we're going to organize them as undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. And in this case, they're going to go in the level of more disturbing. Like as they go on, they'll get more and more disturbing. And the reason for that is, again, while these are fun movies, there are some elements of them that are a little disturbing. And so as we go on, we'll get a little bit darker, a little bit more distressing, disturbing. And you'll see what we're talking about as we get into them. So why not get into them right now? The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Ready or Not. Ready or Not came out in 2019 and is really the epitome of what I'm talking about when I say a fun fighting back movie. This is the kind of movie I'm talking about because this movie is an absolute blast. It seemed like it kind of came out of nowhere and really kind of caught on with people because it just had a very fun spirit, a fun energy, and a tremendous amount of gore. If you're not familiar with it, the movie stars Samara Weaving as a woman marrying into a rather wealthy family that's kind of mysterious, but they've gotten their fortune based on games, board games, and whatnot. And then there's a family tradition on the wedding night that the family wants her to participate in, where they play a game together as a family. the game that's chosen is hide and seek, and things don't go as smoothly as you might think they would go playing a game of hide and seek. This family has a lot of baggage and a lot of weird, interesting secrets. And we won't say anything more than that so as to not spoil the movie for you, even though the movie was probably spoiled quite a bit by the trailer, frankly. And that's a little unfortunate because this movie is fantastic. And I would argue that the less you know about it, the better your experience might be. Now, I understand when it comes to marketing that you kind of have to give the potential audience member enough to go on to make them want to see the movie, otherwise they'll just skip it. So I know why you have to sell what you sell in the movie, but knowing that this movie is a fighting back movie in and of itself is somewhat of a spoiler, frankly. And I try to avoid spoilers here on the channel, but it's going into the subgenre, and there it is. But the honestly, if you saw any of the trailers, or even if you saw the cover of the the poster or the DVD, you can kind of tell what this movie is going to be or where it's going to go. But then it honestly, even if you know that, it doesn't really diminish the ride all that much. I think it's a fun thing to not know about it and just kind of be slapped upside the head with it, but it's a fun ride regardless. The movie has a fantastic cast led by Samara Weaving, who I already mentioned, and she is phenomenal in this movie. It's, in my opinion, a star-making turn, even though I don't think she's really taken off as an A-lister or anything yet. But she is making a lot of movies, including a lot of genre films, and making a name for herself because she is excellent in general. And in this movie, she is your lead character. You're with her, and so you're seeing everything unfold through her eyes, so it's important that you connect with her, and you absolutely do in this movie. And she goes believably from victim to fighting back very convincingly, which is again is another important part of these movies. You got to believe that the person fighting back could fight back. You got to believe in what they're able to do, or that the scenario would lend itself to them being able to accomplish what they accomplished. And Samara Weaving knocks it out of the park. But you've got Adam Brody in this. You've got Andy McDowell. You've got a bevy of recognizable faces in the movie, and they're adding a lot to the whole thing, the whole production. And on top of that, it's directed extremely well. It's got a great look to a great feel for it, great music. Everything has come together rather nicely. But the most important thing is the balance of genuine thrill and comedy. This is a very funny movie, and you'll see that in the trailer too. Like they kind of tip some of the best jokes, frankly, in the trailer. But it's really a funny movie, but it's not scary. You know what I mean? It's got enough scare or thrill or tension in the movie to make it feel like a bona fide horror movie, while at the same time making you crack up. It's got that horror comedy balance just right. I didn't put in the horror comedy because I wanted to put it here because, again, it's quite literally one of the quintessential fighting back movies, but it is a horror comedy. You could put it right in that slot. If you want to put that on your syllabus, perfectly fine. As I said, I don't want to get too much into plot points and plot details because in this case, I think it really is a spoiler for the movie, but it does go into some ridiculously gory, strange things. There's a lot of violence in the movie. The gore is played for laughs, so it's not as disturbing as it might be in a different movie. It's really gross, don't get me wrong, but it's always done in kind of a fun, ew, ha, 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 kind of way that works really, really well. But it also just makes it go into this absurd area where the whole motivations of the family and the backstory of everything, again, I don't want to spoil any of it, is kind of ludicrous. It's kind of ridiculous and fun. And so that tone of fun is carried out throughout the movie. This was an incredibly fun movie. It was one of my favorites of 2019 when it came out. It was a surprise to me because I expected it to be fun, but I didn't expect it to be extremely fun. It was a movie I was raving about to people when it came out. You got to go see it. You got to go check it out. It just comes together so nicely. There's really nothing I have to complain about in this movie. Yeah, there's some parts of it that strain credulity. It's like, you have to kind of suspend your disbelief, but I would say no more so than any other horror movie. And I think that because you're having such a good ride, you won't stop to think about that. It won't hang you up, like other movies do. That's always my litmus test. If a movie's got plot holes in it or some straining credulity moments, and you're stopping to think about that, then the movie's not really doing its job. But if you're blowing past those things because you're having a good time, and then you don't think about it till later when you really think about the movie, then that movie did its job. It entertained you, and this movie entertained me for sure. I would pretty much recommend this movie to just about anybody, with the caveat again that it is gory, but it's a very accessible movie. Like you don't have to necessarily be a horror buff to enjoy this movie. In fact, I know several people who took a chance on this that aren't horror fans that wound up enjoying it quite a bit. And that always makes me happy because I love gateway horror movies, movies that you can show your friends that aren't into horror and get them into it and then go, hey, if you like that, maybe you'll want to check out this too. And I'd say this is definitely one of those movies. It's very accessible, got very good mainstream appeal, despite not having any really big stars in it. And it's just a really well made, well paced, fun, funny movie that I would recommend to all of you. I'm assuming a lot of you probably checked it out, but if you haven't, definitely check it out and then come back and let us know what you think because I'd like to know, especially if you don't know a lot about it, go and see it before anybody spoils too much for you. And I'd like to know what you guys think about it. Come back in the comments and let us know. But if you have seen Ready or Not, am I too effusive about this one? Am I overselling it? Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are, especially if you're not as high on it as I am and level set for the rest of us. But Ready or Not for me is a high recommend. I can't praise it enough. The next movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Your Next. Your Next came out in 2011 and is another movie that I find to be very, very fun. It's got that same energy of surprise and not really knowing what to expect when you're watching this movie. You think it's one thing and then it's another thing, and it turns it all on its head. But it's very different in tone from Ready or Not. But we'll get into that. If you've never seen it before, Your Next is the story of a dysfunctional family that gets together for a dinner, and you can tell that the family doesn't really get along super well. It's kind of an awkward dinner, and well, one of the sons has brought a new girlfriend with him, and while they're there, a home invasion happens where they're suddenly attacked by men wearing animal masks, and the family's under siege. Only these masked intruders get more than they bargained for because the son's new guest, his new girlfriend, is a survivalist and she's not having any of this. She's going to fight back. And I'm going to stop there before I spoil any more than I already just did because this is another movie where it was kind of spoiled a little bit by the trailer. And there's not much you can do about that, like we were saying. Your Next was incredible to me. I really, really liked this movie because of the way it spun things on its head. It really comes off as a standard home invasion movie, or maybe not a standard one, but you kind of think you know what to expect with the home invasion movie, and then it went into fighting back. And if you hadn't seen the trailer or knew anything about it, I think that would really throw you off. I think that would really catch you off guard. It's a really nice surprise. But even if you know that, kind of like Ready or Not, you're still going to have a good time, even if you know it's coming, because it's just done so well. Part of the reason why is because of the creative team behind it. Director Adam Wingard and writer Simon Barrett have joined once again to do incredible job with this movie. If you're not familiar with them, they are a writer-director combo that do a lot of horror movies. They did The Guest, they did the Blair Witch reboot. They're quite good, and they're part of the mumblecore movement, which we will talk about in the future here in the syllabus in regards to horror movies. But in short, it's basically this idea of using like improv or semi-scripted moments in your movie, and they did that here in Your Next. The dinner party is largely improvised and it gives a very realistic feeling and you really get a flavor for who the characters are because of that. And I tend to like those movies, the mumblecore movies, and I tend to like this concept because I think you get much more naturalistic performances, and that happened here. As a result, you feel like you're dealing with a real family, and when they're getting attacked, you're kind of buying into it more, even though it's kind of a fantastical idea, but you're buying into it because you're buying into the characters. The characters are fantastic in large part because of the performances of the actors playing them. The lead actress Sharni Vinson is fantastic in this movie. Again, another one of those situations where you need to buy into her and her abilities and her character to really go on this ride, and I think she does a fantastic job of convincing you of that. But all the supporting cast is really good too. If you're familiar with the mumblecore movement, or if you're familiar with this kind of group or cadre of actors, you see them pop up together a lot. Guys like AJ Bowen and Joe Swanberg and stuff like that. They tend to be in a lot of each other's movies. They are great, and they always bring great work to the table. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Barbara Crampton showing up in a kind of a comeback role for her. Absolutely fantastic. She's horror royalty, and she's great in the movie as she always is. There's even a little cameo by director Ty West in the movie. He's got a small role in it, and again, because he's part of this whole gang, this whole movement. And you know me, I love me some Ty West. So that's like a little fun thing to mention as well. But everybody in the movie is really, really good and a lot of fun, and everybody knows what kind of movie it is. The kind of movie it is a lot more serious than Ready or Not. It's not a horror comedy. It's playing it straight. If Ready or Not kind of removed the comedy elements from it, you'd have something closer to Your Next. Your Next is playing it a lot more straight to its benefit. I think it works extremely well. Like Ready or Not, it's got a lot of gore, and in this case, it's not undercut by comedy, so it's a little bit more brutal, hence giving it the graduate level above Ready or Not in terms of how disturbing it is, but it's not tremendously disturbing. Once again, I think you've got a movie that the general public can probably get into because it's a lot more actiony and thriller-like, even though it's got some heavy gore, and it is really a home invasion movie. It's in the horror subgenre of home invasion if you want it to be. I put it, of course, here in Fighting Back because once again, the fighting back is the big part of the movie. It's the key of it. It's not a standard home invasion movie. Its setup is, and then it goes very different than your standard home invasion movie. And that's what I love about it. And that's what everybody loves about it. It's a great flick. It was very popular when it came out, very well received. And I was kind of surprised, frankly, they haven't tried to franchise this, but I'm glad that they haven't. I think leaving it the way it is, letting it stand on its own, is the way to go. I gotta believe that the temptation is probably pretty high, even though I don't think it made a ton of money or anything like that, but it's got a strong reputation. Now, I know that that reputation is not universal. I don't think everybody loves this movie. I think there is a group of people that maybe think it's a little overrated, and that's fine. And if you're one of them, let us know in the comments why you think it's overrated. I think it's properly rated. I think it's fantastic. In fact, maybe a little underrated because it's not as famous as maybe I think it should be. But I think it's a very fun ride. I think it's really well made. I like Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett. I think the writing is sharp. I think the direction is sharp. I think the movie is very well paced. If I have a critique of it, it's that the masks that the villains wear are subpar. And actually, my good friend Noah Hook on Hamburgers and Horror and I had a discussion about this on his channel when we discussed the most overrated and underrated horror masks. And check that video out if you want to see more about it. But yeah, this is one where they kind of fall short a little bit. They're meant to be kind of eerie and creepy, but they don't really tie into anything, and they just kind of dangle out. But it's really a nitpick. I mean, the type of mask they're using, that's my complaint. It's not a really heavy complaint. What I really like here is the creative kills, the creative traps. I'll say no more on that. And the performances across the board. Excellent performances. The twists in this movie are pretty good, if not really good. And it's just a fun ride. Again, I'm having a good time watching this movie, watching people who are trying to commit a crime get surprised when they did not plan for things to go the way they go. And it's very satisfying. I'm obviously really into this one as Ready or Not. Like I really like Your Next. So I've been effusive about the first two movies here, and once again, I invite you, if you're less effusive, you've seen it and you're less effusive about them, let us know in the comments below. Like if you think that I'm overselling Your Next, let us know. If you think it is overrated, let us know. We'll be kind to you guys. But if you haven't seen Your Next, I definitely recommend it. It's clearly a high recommend from me because it's a good time. And so if you're down for these kind of movies, Your Next is one that you should have already seen. And the last movie on the syllabus that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Don't Breathe. Don't Breathe came out in 2016 and really turned the fighting back subgenre on its head. It took a lot of the tropes of these movies and really kind of inverted them or twisted them in a way that made it a lot more interesting, a lot more challenging, and definitely something to talk about. So let's go ahead and talk about it. If you haven't seen it before, Don't Breathe is the story of three young people who like to break into houses and rob them. And they target this old blind guy who is, I think, an army veteran and is supposedly sitting on a pile of cash from a settlement when his daughter passed away. And they think he's going to be an easy mark because of the fact that he's blind. Only when they break into this house, they find he is not as easy of a mark as they thought, and he might be a lot more dangerous than they expected, and a lot of hijinks abound. And we're going to stop right there so as to not spoil it, of course. But Don't Breathe is a great movie, but also an uncomfortable movie when you really stop to think about it, or even if you're just casually watching it, frankly. The movie does something interesting, and it's going to be hard to talk about this without spoiling it, but I'm going to do my best. The movie sets up a premise of criminals breaking into a house, and the victim then turning around and fighting back, just like any of the other fighting back movies that we're talking about. But the interesting thing starts with having the criminals be the focus. So they're kind of like your protagonists in a way. So that's already right off the bat strange because you're kind of being asked to identify with the criminals, and you kind of do. And then when the victim starts to fight back, things twist where you realize that maybe your criminals are genuinely your protagonists and maybe your victim really is your antagonist. That's about as far as I want to go with it. The victim may not be a good guy. I'm just going to say it that way. And that's fascinating because all of the other fighting back movies we're looking at really are talking about, you relating to the victim, siding with the victim, seeing that comeuppance that I was talking about. And in this case, that gets flipped on its head. The fighting back, suddenly you're not rooting for the guy fighting back. And that's interesting. And it makes for a really neat twist on this subgenre that I absolutely adore. Part of why this movie works so well is, of course, that it's directed by Fede Alvarez, who did the Evil Dead remake and a few other things. He is a very, very good director. I really like his style. I really like his visuals, and he's on full display here. He shoots this movie in a very great way to really enhance that claustrophobia. The sound design is excellent because, of course, you've got a blind guy, so sound becomes an important, integral part of the movie, and he does that masterfully. The performances, by and large, are excellent in this movie, led by Jane Levy as one of the criminals that are breaking in. She is incredibly charming. She is a very good actress, an underrated actress. I'm a fan of hers. I've seen many things with her in it, and I've liked every single thing that I've seen her in. And then, of course, Stephen Lang as the victim, as the blind guy, is a powerhouse. He is all at once incredibly imposing and also, very believable at the same time. Like he vacillates from being a very believable portrayal of a blind man and also like being like a daredevil-esque superhero, and you buy into it. And I think it's credit to the performance and to the director. I think that the two together worked really wonderfully to give you this uh, villain, anti-hero, victim, whatever you want to call it, a well-rounded and interesting backstory and motivation that, again, I don't want to spoil it for you, but is challenging. The character is challenging because you're set up with him as the victim, and then he's not, and it almost makes your head spin, and makes you feel a little weird for sympathizing for him early on in the movie. It's a wild ride, and if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's why the movie is the most disturbing of the movies that we're talking about here. This movie goes into some very dark places. Once again, this movie is not really a horror comedy. It's not really this one's not even as fun as the other two that we talked about. This movie's less fun. I mean, I think it's a good movie. It's a fun movie, but because of some of the stuff that happens in this movie, it feels like less of a fun ride. It feels a little gross, a little dirty, a little icky, in a good way. And at least for me, horror fans who like a little ick in their movies, this one's gonna scratch that itch for you, but it's not gonna be for everybody. This goes into some trigger warning ish type way places that I don't want to spoil for you. So if you're sensitive, look up the plot of the movie and some of the twists before you see it if you haven't seen it. But it's an interesting thing to mention though because Stephen Lang is in the sequel for this movie, and it's interesting to note that this is a movie that got a sequel, whereas the first two we talked about did not. And question whether or not it was wise to do a sequel for this because again, Stephen Lang reprising his role, and they kind of try to, I don't know, ease up a little bit on some of the darkish stuff that was in the first movie, and to its detriment. I don't think the sequel measures up to the original, and I don't think I'm alone in that opinion. But the original does measure up. It's a great movie. It's a thrill. There's so much tension in this movie, so much nail biting. So the movie's called Don't Breathe. It's because you're wanting to hold in your breath watching it, and it works really, really well. This movie is just really well made, really well acted. Just all around a really good movie. I really like this movie a lot. Sequel, less so, but I definitely recommend Don't Breathe, with the caveat that if you're easily triggered, check it out first. Online, don't doesthedogdie.com, something like that, and figure out if you can handle it. But if you've seen Don't Breathe, once again, am I overrating it? How do you feel about it? How did you feel about the twist, and then in particular how they dealt with the twist in the sequel? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that in the comments below. Try not to spoil things for people who haven't seen it, of course, but I'd like to have a further discussion about this one because this movie bears talking about. This movie definitely has some interesting talking points, and I'm dancing around a lot of them, as you can tell, because I don't want to spoil things. But we should get into this movie in the comments. So those are our selections for the fighting back subgenre, but if you like fighting back movies, then I've got your back because I've got a few extra credit selections for you. The first one we're going to talk about is a movie called Hard Candy. And Hard Candy came out in 2005 and is something of a controversial movie and a little bit of a tough watch, especially if, again, if you're sensitive to things. But we'll get into that in just a second. If you haven't seen it, the movie stars Elliot Page as a young underage girl flirting with an older man played by Patrick Wilson via the internet, and she agrees to meet him, and it's very clear that he is planning on doing something very bad and illegal to her, only she's gonna fight back and turn the tables on him in really impressive and satisfying fashion, if I'm being honest with you. I won't spoil the details of it, of course, but suffice to say, Hard Candy is it's a rah-rah movie if you have a certain feeling about pedophilia. If you really hate pedophilia, you're gonna like the way Hard Candy goes, I think. But it's a little bit of a hard watch early on because it's really kind of right up front showing how that grooming works and how that preying on young girls works. It's uncomfortable to say the least. It's a really icky feeling, kind of like you Don't Breathe, but in a different way. Really icky, really ugh, just kind of slimy and it make you squirm a little bit. In fact, I remember trying to make my sister watch this movie and she would not. When I told her the general premise, and I didn't want to spoil anything on it, I told her the general premise and she was like, nah, not gonna watch it. She just little too upset about that kind of thing. And so it was interesting to me that like people feel really sensitive about that kind of thing. So you kind of have to realize up front that there's that issue. But the interesting thing about this one is this is one where you really could make the argument that it's more of a revenge movie than a fighting back movie because the protagonist played by Elliot Page is kind of hunting the pedophile. So it's really more like getting revenge for past acts. But at the same time, they keep fighting back on each other. He fights back against her, the character her, and she fights back against him. And you have this back and forth fighting back. So it's this weird dual fighting back movie where both the protagonist and the antagonist are doing fighting back in various parts of the movie. So I felt like I should put it here because I thought that was interesting that you had the protagonist fighting back, the antagonist fighting back, then the protagonist fighting back. And it just kind of kept going back and forth and made for a very fun, satisfying ride. This is an imaginative movie in the best possible way. If you haven't seen it, caveat, it's about some sensitive subject matters, but I do think it's very good. It's very well made, very, very well performed by the two actors. And definitely one that I feel like, with that comeuppance reward, hits the mark very, very well. So if you like that kind of thing, check out Hard Candy. And if you've seen it already, let me know what you think. Do you find it as slimy as I do? I bet you do. The next extra credit movie we're talking about for fighting back is The Hunt. And The Hunt came out in 2020. It was just before the pandemic hit, actually. It was like maybe the last movie that I saw in theaters, I think. And it was somewhat of a controversial movie, kind of strangely, but it wound up being an incredibly fun ride, and I like this movie very much. If you're not familiar with it, the general premise of the movie is that a bunch of liberals have kidnapped a bunch of conservatives to let them loose out in the woods so that they can hunt them and kill them. Only one of the people that they've grabbed up for this sport is somebody who is much more capable than they were expecting, and they get a lot more than they bargained for. And we'll, of course, leave it there so we don't spoil the details of the movie for you. But The Hunt got a lot of buzz because of its politics. It's really a social satire on the political divide and how much the right and the left hate each other. But the interesting thing and where this movie got into some controversy was that each side really thought that it was bashing them. The liberals thought that they were being bashed because they were being portrayed as, people who would hunt people. They were the villains. And then conservatives were being upset because they were being hunted and shown as, deplorable, they use the word deplorable in the movie, caricatures, big, broad caricatures. And the fact of the matter is both are true. This movie's criticizing both sides, which I think is a blast. And that's usually where my sweet spot is. If you're making fun of both the right and the left, I'm probably on board. I think that that is interesting and fun, and I like the way that they did it. If you made a movie that really like rubbed everybody wrong way, that's a movie I want to see, and it really does. But the funny thing is, you could flip it around. You could say that each side is being represented positively in one way or another. You can put the spin around either way. So it's kind of fun that people are getting so worked up about it, but it really is not a movie to get worked up about. It's really not taking itself seriously at all. It's very tongue in cheek right from the get go. You can see from the dialogue that it's really kind of almost a campy version of this movie. Like it's really, like I said, tongue in cheek, and when you see these stereotype characters and what happens to them almost right off the bat, you can understand where the movie's going with this. It's got some wonderful cast members who maybe are just kind of cameos, and I don't want to say more than that. But the star Betty Gilpin is fantastic, and you're seeing a theme here. The leads in these movies have to be great in order to make these movies great, and Betty Gilpin from I think the show Glow is fantastic. She I never really paid much attention to her before this movie, but now she's on my radar because she's so good in this movie. And the co-star Hilary Swank is the villain, is fantastic. I'm not a huge Hilary Swank fan, but she's never bad. I have to give it up to her. She's really good, and she's really good in this movie. But it's just a fun ride. Like many of the other movies, it's got a lot of gore in it. It's got a lot of violence into it, but it's a little bit more in tone with Ready or Not, in that it's really kind of funny and not taking itself terribly seriously, and kind of like blatantly thumbing its nose at everybody, just kind of trying to piss everybody off, and apparently doing a good job of it. I really am surprised that people got as worked up about it as they did, though, because it's clearly just kind of fun, and it probably got more press because of that than it honestly deserves. This is not exactly high art, but it's fun. It's a fun movie, and I enjoy it a lot. I know that a lot of people were down on this movie. They didn't really care for it as much as I do. So I know I might be in the minority on this one. I don't think this was as well received as all the other movies we've talked about so far. So let me know. Are you one of the people that doesn't really dig it? Because I do. I dig it a lot, and I think you should check it out. But if you were bothered by it, or if you really do think that it leans one way or the other on the politics, let us know in the comments below. We'll have that discussion. But I definitely think it's straddling the line between the two sides in a very smart and fun way. And the last extra credit movie we're talking about today is Green Room. And Green Room came out in 2015, and this movie is heavy. This movie has a lot going on, and it's really dark, but it's also rather brilliant. I am a big fan of Green Room. If you're not familiar with it, the movie stars Anton Yelchin as the leader of a punk band that winds up playing a gig at this neo-Nazi bar, which they're not terribly thrilled about. But they play the gig, but before they can leave, they wind up witnessing a murder, and then the neo-Nazis don't want to let them leave and want to keep them locked up in the green room, where the band was, setting up the dressing room, if you will. And hijinks abound as the band tries to figure out what they're going to do next. And we'll, of course, leave it there so as to not spoil it, but Green Room is intense. Now, right off the bat, you've got neo-Nazis, you've got skinheads, so you've got intensity right off the bat. You've got punk music, you've got intensity there. You've got a really claustrophobic movie that's set largely just in this one tiny club, and then at that point, mostly in one room of this one tiny club. So you've got this claustrophobia. So again, intense. And then you've got Patrick Stewart playing the lead not neo-Nazi. Intense. If you only know Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard or Professor X, you need to see Green Room because it's going to blow your mind. He is so intense and so disturbing and frightening in this movie as the cool, calm, collected neo-Nazi leader. He's brilliant, and he's a big part of why this movie is as good as it is. I mean, I'm a big Patrick Stewart fan in general, but man, this might be one of his best performances, or at least one of my favorite performances of his, because it's very against type, very chilling, very good. And Anton Yelchin is, as always, brilliant. Gone too soon, and it breaks my heart that he passed so young, because I can't think of anything I've seen him in that I didn't think he was absolutely fantastic in. He's got so much charm, so much natural ability. He's just so comfortable on camera, so believable and relatable and likable. And it's a shame that he's not going to be able to make any more movies. It breaks my heart because he was such a talent, and he is great here. He's your everyman. He's your main guy. And of course, if it's Anton Yelchin, you're going to connect with him, and you do. And it's an impossible situation that they're put into, that you find yourself wondering, what would you do in this and how would you fight back? And I always think that's one of the best things in a horror movie. When you're starting to ask yourself what you would do differently, you're involved, you're invested in the movie. And that definitely happens in Green Room. The movie is violent, violent, violent. It's got some really dark stuff. And of course, it's got some uncomfortable stuff about race in there too. So, there's your trigger warnings. You're forewarned about it. It's a tough movie in that sense, but it's not overly tough. It's not overly gory, overly sensitive. It's not, I wouldn't call it taboo. I'd say it's kind of brushing up against taboo, not really quite going full taboo, but it's really good. Everybody in the movie's good, extremely well paced by the guy who directed Blue Ruin, which we will talk about in the future at some point. But if you've seen Blue Ruin, you get an idea of what you're in for. The movie is excellent, excellent. In fact, as I'm talking about it now, I'm kind of asking myself, why didn't I put it on the syllabus proper? And I guess it's because, it's a little less horror than the other movies. It's more drama. It's a little bit more serious minded and a little bit more thriller drama than it is horror. But I'm probably splitting hairs here. There's other thriller horror type movies that I've put on the list before. I'm good about that kind of thing. So I probably should have put Green Room on the actual syllabus. It's that good. If you've seen Green Room, let us know your thoughts on it because I think it's an excellent movie. Like, I won't go so far as to say masterpiece, but excellent movie. Just really well made, really well directed. I mean, again, you've seen the theme. All the movies we're talking about this week are just really well made movies, and this one is maybe one of the best well made movies, to be honest with you. So I have high praise for Green Room. I have a high recommend for it, but again, might not be for everybody. So do your due diligence first, and let me know what you think if you decide to check it out. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the fighting back subgenre of horror. As I've said before, I really like these kind of movies. I think they're a lot of fun. I think that they're very rewarding and satisfying for the viewer. You kind of get that emotional payoff that you're looking for when you see somebody get it in the end. So yeah, I love these movies. I hope you do too. Let me know in the comments below what you think of them. But now it's that time where we look at a horror trivia question and I try to answer it live on camera so you can test my skills and knowledge. So let's get into that right now. Get my trusty glasses on because I'm that age. And I've got my horror trivia pursuit card right here. And let's look at the killer subgenre because that tracks. So here's our question for this week. How many masked strangers attack the couple in 2008's The Strangers? This is an easy question for me because we've talked about The Strangers not that long ago, and I love that movie. So this one's very easy. How many masked strangers attacked the couple in 2008's The Strangers? I would expect that if you've seen the movie, or even if you've just, seen like the trailer but remember it well enough, you're gonna probably know the answer to this question. It's not a particularly hard one, so I'm not even gonna brag about the fact that I know the answer to this question because I think it's fairly easy. But if you haven't seen The Strangers, then you probably have no clue. If you're not familiar with the movie or you don't really know it, you're not going to know anything about it. And I'm kind of rambling a little bit just to give you a little bit of time to think about the question, even though it's kind of one of those, either you know it or you don't. And I guess if you don't know, you can just take a shot in the dark. You're guessing a number, and I'll give you a clue. It's not a fraction. It's a whole number. But yeah, I'm just kind of spinning my wheels here because I know it. And I'm just not. I'm just giving you time to think in case you have to think about it. But going once, going twice. Let's go ahead and get right into this. My answer, of course, is three. There were three masked strangers in The Strangers, but I'll just double check the answer. Yeah, it's three. That was an easy one. I've been doing pretty well on these, but I'm not bragging about that one because, frankly, too easy. I expect that if you knew anything about The Strangers at all, you got that one right. But if you didn't for some reason, let me know in the comments below. Confess. Confess that you didn't get it right. Let us all know. It will be nice. Don't worry about it. But I really enjoy when you guys participate in the horror trivia question. And I appreciate it when you guys stick around to the end of the video because apparently that means something to YouTube. I don't really care about this stuff, but I'm glad to have you here. I enjoy hanging out with you guys. I enjoy your comments. So thank you guys very much for your attendance this week. Thank you in advance for your comments. And until next week when we discuss something else, class dismissed.